Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you all for coming to the inaugural Technology and Innovation Rounds. Very first one, it's take two. We tried the first time, but poor Joe got stuck in Boston, so we had to try again. So thank you all for coming. We actually have 23 people online, so welcome to them as well. On behalf of Techna and Digital, we're really pleased to launch this new series. So often we get together and we talk about what's going on, and we talk about budgets, and we talk about issues, and it's all good stuff. But we very rarely talk about all of the amazing things that happen when you all go back to your desks and do your work. And so we're just an organization full of very innovative people doing very exciting things. And so what we have decided to do is to create space for us to have conversations around what's happening in the ecosystem. And we're fairly distributed, so we have those people hiding up on the fourth floor of RFE. You have to go through the door. What do they do back there? You have the people over on AOB. You have people down in the basement of Princess Margaret. And so this is really intended to be an opportunity. We're going to meet once a month and just have a relaxing hour of enjoying each other's work and ideas and participating. When we put out the call to ask people if they wanted to help, we had an amazing response. It was really amazing. Sharon, how many people are on your working committee? 30 people have volunteered to be part of this committee to help this happen. So if you're a part of that group, stand up and be recognized, please. And thank you. You haven't done anything. It doesn't matter. You could just be part of the community. And as we've been talking about this, our Techna colleagues were also very excited. So thank you, Luke, for your support in this. And thank you to Kathy and Sharon. We have a very exciting talk, but I will first ask Dr. David Jeffery to come up and say a few words. David.
A few words left. I will say them. Few words. Yeah, okay, so it's great to start to have this forum. As David so eloquently already stated, we work away, we're struggling, it's challenging on many times, technology failing and budgets crunching, but there's actually a ton of really innovative work going on within the program, and it's just, to me, it's that kind of brain food that you need to have to share and to realize there's new opportunities across the organization. So it's a great to have this, and monthly is going to be good because there is so much stuff going on. It's just amazing. I just wish you could just share it all at once, and Joe will give us a pretty good dose of it today. And of course, I'm not going to introduce Joe. I'm going to ask Anjum to introduce Joe. Anjum, as you know, is a director in the Human Factors Group and does a fantastic job of managing that team. And so I'm going to ask her to come up and introduce Joe, because Joe's really well known around the planet. Maybe people don't know that, but he's a bit of a unique asset. I'm not going to say any more because then I'll spoil Anjum's. So come on up, Anjum.
Thanks, David. And thank you for this opportunity. I was actually really excited to be able to introduce Joe today because Joe and I have known each other for 23 years. We met in 1996 in what was then the Charlie Conacher wing of the original Toronto Hospital fronting Mars. And I remember walking into that lab in 1996 with its brick walls and high ceilings and the arched windows that are still part of the Mars building today. And there in a corner office, barely the size of his desk, sat Joe. And he was hunched over his computer, curls popping out, and he was burning multimedia CDs. And so if you were around in 1996, you will know that burning a multimedia CD took forever. It literally took hours. And so I found it both odd and amazing that Joe was burning away. And amazing because what he was burning onto these multimedia CDs was and animation. He had hired an art student from Concordia, Anna, to animate the patient journey for patients who were about to undergo electrosurgery. Electrosurgery was a new innovation at the time. And so for me, this idea that you could actually like literally bring art and design and storytelling and medical innovation and education and health delivery together, like it really kind of shifted things for me. I found it amazing. In 1996, Joe was service designing the patient experience. I had a great 4-month internship with Joe that winter, and I left his lab feeling re-energized and excited about the work that I would be embarking on as a biomedical engineer and a human factors engineer. And I left, but not without telling Joe that one day I would be back for his job. True story. So fast forward 23 years, and so much has changed. So much has changed in ways that were unfathomable from our little lab in the Conacher wing. But also in ways that are, not so different. So things in many ways are kind of frightening, but also hopeful. And Joe is still, as he was with his CDs, still kind of at the leading edge. He was designing digital therapeutics before they were called that on flip phones. And when he didn't have the Bluetooth connectivity to connect those phones to the devices that were necessary to smooth the patient experience, he had those Bluetooth dongles soldered in our labs. Like, that was the level of commitment he had to the patient experience, because he knew that when you prioritize patient experience, as he did when he was designing remote monitoring technology for our now world-renowned home hemodialysis program, when you prioritize patient experience, you not only end up with better patient outcomes, as we do now with patients who are dialyzing every day in their homes while they sleep, but you also end up optimizing care delivery and really transforming the system. And so when you free up those resources to do other things and you free up those people to do other things, that's when innovation gets really exciting, because you see innovation breeding innovation. And I could talk about BANT and Medley and all of the work that's been spawned since. Joe's CV is 45 pages long, but suffice it to say that the work that Joe continues to do at the intersection of technology, innovation, design, and experience is still really exciting and really energizing. And today, more so than in 1996, this work is necessary. It's necessary because of the promise of the transformation that it brings. So please join me in welcoming the inaugural Wolfond Chair in Digital Health, Assistant Professor at IHPME, and Executive Director of Medical Engineering at U of T.
Thank you. Wow.
I had a joke about your hair.
So Anjum did take my job, and then she went on and took it up a level. So thank you, Anjum. That was great of you. Yeah, you brought back a lot of memories of 1996. So, oops, what did I just do? So I'm going to talk about a bunch of things once I get this back up again. Is that okay? So let's begin. I want to give some historical context to what we're going to be talking about. Let's go back to a simpler time. Okay, so do you know what year this is? 64. Yes, this is older than Anjum and I. All right, this is 64. So, and it's a simpler time, but it just gives you think about how far back this is, and I mean, in looking at the context of medical technology in that time, there was actually no such thing as medical engineering back in 1964. In UHN, medical engineering started in 1967. Right, it was the first employees hired to handle technology in the hospital. So this is how far back. But the electronic health record dates back to 1964. IBM in Akron, Ohio, started installing what they call these terminals in a hospital setting in 1964, right? And this is how far back is it. There's no CRT here, right? Like this is how far back it goes. And I mean, it's incredible, but you know, this video was trying to exemplify what the hope of the EHR was back in 1964. So there's three things that they wanted out of the EHR. Less paperwork. This notion of correlation of diseases, that if you had this data captured and you could relate outcomes to the therapeutics and the diagnostics, you could actually be able to predict a disease and predict trajectories of disease, right? The whole notion. And the last one, also eliminate errors. So 55 years later, how are we doing? Got it? How far have we come? Ugh. So, I mean, this is kind of pervasive, is that we have a gap, we have a deficit of design in healthcare. So this is something that is pretty pervasive, not just in the technology, but in the experiences that people have every single day working in the hospital. So this New York Times article, I think, is a real eye-opener. But describing it as bad design is not fair, because it's no design, right? There's so many experiences that are just ad hoc in healthcare, a lot of technologies that are not fully informed. So it's a deficit of design. It's not necessarily bad design. And the designers in the room, I think there might be a few, know this is the double diamond. So it's the most simplest way of looking at a design problem, is that you're trying to doing the right thing and you have to do things right. It's very simplistic, but those are the two parts of design you need to nail, is doing the right thing and doing it right. So with the EHR, there's been lots of this in the media, right? So there's this Atul Gawande piece on the $1.6 billion implementation of EHRs in Boston. And then just this past weekend was this article. It's a very long read, but you know, this talks about the Obama initiative, around $36 billion investments in electronic health record, and really what do we have to show for it? So it's a bit concerning, but is it very much of a surprise when you look at a lot of electronic health records as to where we are, and have we even come close to some of those predictions back in the 1960s, right? And I mean, this is a pervasive problem, that it's contributing to burnout. And it's attributable somewhat to the long hours, but the long hours that EHRs are contributing to, and again, it's probably no surprise looking at a lot of user interfaces and the complexity of electronic health records, the unnecessary complexity of electronic health records. And this is the other disturbing thing. See the fellow on the right here? Who's that fellow on the right? It's a scribe. So this is becoming a lot more pervasive in the US. I don't think it'll ever happen in Canada, because I don't think we could afford it. But this is typically sometimes a medical student, but medical students aren't particularly good at scribes. They make the error rates are 25 to 50%. But this is to free up the clinician from that EHR. So how damning is it about your product that you require a specialized, professional to operate your product, that it was really the primary user can no longer use it? It's a pretty damning indictment of where we're at. So, but, scribes are now being shown to restore joy, right? And look how everybody's so happy in this picture, right? So, but I mean, it's unrealistic to think, especially in our system, that we would be employing scribes. And last year, this is a shot from a museum in downtown Paris, and I just thought I had to take this picture of the fax machine behind glass. And it is kind of amusing, because it's pretty pervasive still in healthcare to this day that we have fax machines. But it's not our fault, us in the healthcare system. I'm tired of this notion that we're accused of being Luddites in healthcare, that we don't know enough about technology and we don't adopt technology. And many of you who work in medical engineering and in physics know that that's absolute nonsense. That we use perhaps some of the most technologically sophisticated systems, period, in the delivery of care. It's, there is this gap, and, why the fax machine is so pervasive even to this day and why it's such a success after 30 years is that I uncovered this standard, this T.4 standard. And what does this standard allow fax machines to do? It works with any other fax machine in the world. They're very simple to use, and they're very cheap. And that's why they continue to be pervasive. The other reason they're pervasive is that there's nothing to replace them with. Right? We still do not have something that is that easy, that inexpensive, and works with everything. We don't have the interoperability, we don't have the ease of use, and we certainly don't have the cost. If your fax machine was like your EHR, it wouldn't be able to connect to any other fax machine. It would take you months, years to figure out how to use it, and it would probably cost about $100,000, right? So all this acts the fax, and I'm totally for this whole notion of killing the fax machine, but it's not the fax machine's fault. It's the gap, right? That nothing can compare to the ease of use and the interoperability of a fax machine. So in the double diamond paradigm and in electronic health records, I think we're all agreed that the promise of electronic records is a good one. We're just not getting this right side of the double diamond right. Right? There's a deficit there, is that we know that electronic health records are the right thing to design, but we're just not doing it right. Now let's turn to something here in 2018, 2019 is the Apple Watch. And I mean, this device has been getting a lot of press. And I mean, in last year, they announced the ECG version, which is available only in the US. It does not have Health Canada clearance, but this thing can do a single lead ECG. And not only that, is that it can detect the differences between a normal sinus rhythm and a very serious arrhythmia, atrial fibrillation. The problem is nobody asked for this, right? No cardiologist ever said, we need a population-wide screening tool for atrial fibrillation. We need millions of people aged 18 to 34 wearing Apple Watches to test for atrial fibrillation. Nobody asked for that. So, I mean, even with their state-of-the-art artificial intelligence, and I'm sure it's very sophisticated, it probably has superb sensitivity and specificity. Many people will worry unnecessarily and be overtreated. Like, what's the average age of somebody wearing an Apple Watch? I mean, it probably skews younger. And the need for screening of atrial fibrillation is even less than in that population. So, I mean, the interesting thing is that we know that Apple executes really well. So really, their problem with the double diamond is doing the right thing. I have no doubt that this wearable and Apple will do some great things. Just coming out of the gate with atrial fibrillation was a strange one, right? And just this weekend, they announced, the Stanford investigators announced some of the preliminary findings of what they learned in the Apple Heart study. And so this is literally someone in the crowd taking pictures at the American College of Cardiology event in New Orleans. And you can see that what they did is in order to verify the Apple Watch output is that they had people wear a proper ECG patch for 13 days following the Apple Watch indicating atrial fibrillation. And you know what you end up getting is, I don't know if you can see here, but they got a yield of about 34%. So the Apple Watch was right about 34% of the time. That's not that great. And so the cardiologists in the crowd were underwhelmed. Look at the demographic, the younger demographic. It was 18%. It got it right, 18%. I think what's more notable, what I got excited about, look at the N of the study. 419,297 patients in 8 months. Now that's interesting. To me, that was the biggest outcome of the study, not the atrial fibrillation, but the fact that they were able to recruit so many patients, 1 in 600 adults in the US, into the study. That's the significance. That's the power of consumer health and wearables at that scale. And I should get off Twitter because this stuff drives me nuts. This is what's the outcome after this presentation is the media comes out with these breathless headlines. So the Apple Watch could save your life by detecting irregular heartbeat, I suppose. And this one is even massive study proves Apple Watch could save your life. So there's a lot of this going on, and again, I should stay off Twitter, and probably you should stay off Twitter as well, because this stuff will infuriate you, right? I mean, there was a very well studied, a good study, and they were very modest about the results, and it's not as if Apple started coming out and saying these things, but the media would love to make a headline. You know, it occurs to me, you know, we have this terrific portal in MyUHN, and I think it all the more important about this notion of getting patients involved in their own care, but also the potential for research. That's that 419,000 people recruited in. Well, I mean, we do have about over 70,000, right, people on MyUHN. But, you know, we need to be very protective of MyUHN and the notion that patients need access to the patient record, because this is still not a universal truth. There's still not people who are not fully convinced that this is needed or even necessary, or is it the future of health. And you know, this fellow, Joe Biden, who led this cancer moonshot a few years ago, and he lamented to an audience of policymakers and people in the tech industry as to, like, why do patients still not have easy access to their personal health information? And one executive put up their hand and said this: why do you want your medical records? There are thousands of pages of which you understand 10. So this is of a major technology company in the US, said this to Joe Biden in a very large audience. And you know what Joe Biden said? None of your business, right? And it's true. And I think, again, all the more reason that we need to be very cognizant and protective of this notion that patients need access. It's the future of care delivery. It's also going to be the future of delivery, because 70,000 people is just the start. Imagine that as an order of magnitude higher, and for the purposes of research and care. You know, it brings me back to this, what other great things Apple, in fact, are doing. And the Apple Watch is one thing, but there's a simple app that's on your phone, your iPhone, which has this notion of health data. And soon in Canada, there will be this notion of a health records feature on this. And this may seem very modest and not revolutionary, but you have to dig a little deeper to understand the implications of this, is that, you know, any Fire interface this application can connect to and pull in that data into the phone and have a live real-time copy of that data, of everyone's personal health information, right within the application. So no longer are patients just observing their data through a portal, but their data is now resident on their phone. They have become their own custodian by having that real-time copy right on their phone. And the implications of this is that they can start sharing it with other applications. They can start sharing it or donating it for the purposes of research. Right? We've kind of flipped the paradigm now that the patient is now in control of their own information. If they're not going to the portal just to observe, but they're pulling it in and they're using it for their own purposes in a secure way. And the reason I'm excited about this is because it can enable a lot of research and enable all kinds of other applications that can use that data more effectively for personal management. And I don't like calling these apps anymore, because they've moved on to this notion of being digital therapeutics. They can actually improve health outcomes. And it's to oversimplify them to call them apps, because in fact they're services, and in the end they're a therapeutic. And Medley in the middle there, which I'll talk a little bit about, you know, is actually now a Class 2 medical device and is going through the Health Canada process to be approved. We have the audit in April next month. So, you know, in order to get there, you know, UHN had to invest in a quality management system, this ISO 1345, which is the same standard for medical devices, but applied now to software. And I mean, this is another aspect of how it's really important to start delivering all these things electronically is that it's kind of changed our way of thinking about how to do research. So Quinn at the back there with the team at the center have been working on this notion of doing the entire informed consent process through ResearchKit, which is a framework within Apple devices to allow people to go through the entire process of enrolling in a study, but never coming face-to-face with a research coordinator within a hospital setting. Unnecessary when you go through this process. And Quinn and the team went to the lengths of trying to convince sick kids REB, which tends to be a really high bar, and they really like this concept because of the level of transparency and the ease for an individual to take their time to understand what they were getting into rather than having to sit across from a research coordinator to do this. So it kind of brings us to the opportunity with BANT because BANT is going to be doing this for the Diabetes Action Canada. And this is what it will look like by the end of the year with a research study that's coming up within Diabetes Action Canada within BANT. So it wants to know whether or not you're willing to share your data, to donate your data. It's telling you about this particular research study that is sponsored by the University of Laval. And you walk through the eligibility criteria, you gather the data, and look at the level of control you have in terms of what you're sharing and what you're not going to share with the researchers. And then you sign off digitally, right? This is going to democratize the way people can participate in research, that no longer do you need to be associated with an academic center in order to participate in research. You could do this from anywhere in Canada or otherwise. And we have hopes to have a lot of transparency within the application of the type of research studies that are available and how people can participate in them. And through these visualization tools, you will be able to see with a lot of granularity how people are using them, where are they from, and look at the relationship between how they're using it and what the health outcomes are. So BANT is one of the projects that's actually been now 10 years since we've been working on this, and this is probably the third version. When we started BANT, BANT was running on a Nokia S60. Do people remember that device? Then it was running on a BlackBerry, and now it runs on iOS and Android. And finally, Anjan referred to these, we were soldering together these and hacking together glucometers. Just this past year, after 10 years, blood sugar meters are now coming off the shelf now with Bluetooth built in. Thank you. Here's the thing that we thought 10 years ago is that these adapters that we're building in the lab will only last for a year and a half because the industry will come around and build Bluetooth into these devices. Well, it took about 10 years for them to do that. So thankfully, these things come out of the box now, ready to work with applications like BANT. And we're very sensitive to the fact that we don't want to overwhelm patients with a lot of numbers. And the numeracy in typically that we find in people with type 2 diabetes is such that you can't just throw numbers at them. You have to they have to understand the context between the relationship about what they're eating and how it affects their blood sugar. And so that's what BANT does. So these are some shots of BANT. And just really what I'm really excited about is BANT being integrated with OLIS, which is on our timelines here is through the SPARK initiative, that these lab results that are contextualized to diabetes will be pulled right into BANT. And really in the context of care provision, a different model of care, this is BANT with a built-in secured messaging service right within the application, which again we're building to be rolled out by the end of the year. And I think this is particularly important in the context of what we've been talking about in the system about integrated care, is that access is not always great, the experience is not always great, but what if you could access your diabetes educator or a diabetes educator that happens to be online when you have a problem with your insulin pump, as in this case? Do you want to make a visit, or schedule a visit for 2 weeks from now for a face-to-face visit? Or would you like to have just-in-time help that is more efficient and has a better experience and probably costs less than delivering it any other way? So I'm really excited about the prospect of new models of care, the whole notion of integrated care with diabetes or any chronic disease in this manner. So Medley is another application that I've talked about, and it's following along the same lines of patients being able to monitor themselves, but with such a complicated condition that is really one of the main reasons we have very long queues in the emergency department, and we have this whole notion of hallway medicine, is heart failure is contributing to that, because 50% of these patients are rehospitalized at UHN. And Heather Ross's commitment is to half that to 25%. And one of the ways of doing this is that we've basically taken the way heart failure is managed and digitized that in such a way that patients can now self-manage, right? And I mean, this is very important in that this is something that a cardiologist could understand and how the Medley algorithm works. And it can be tweaked and set in terms of specific parameters for that patient. And I mean, the outcome is that because it leverages the knowledge of a cardiologist, and it's also the reason why this is a Class 2 medical device, is that the patient-nurse ratio for Medley is approaching 300 to 1, whereas we just found out this morning from William Osler, a traditional system is about 40 to 1. So it's almost like an order of magnitude difference when the intelligence of a cardiologist is built into it. You know, rather than having a totally passive system that is entirely dependent on people interpreting the data, looking at the data, why not have an algorithm that can interpret that for them? Another application that we're working on, which is just set to release, is our respiratory platform, which is Breathe. And there's a version for asthma and there's a version for COPD. So the asthma is hoping to have, again, this notion of people's ability to care for themselves with a bit of data, a bit of information, a bit of context, and some advice just in time. Could we help them in situations where they otherwise would need a visit to the specialist? So it's a pretty simple process, this first version of Breathe for asthma. It captures medications. You report your symptoms, and it determines whether or not you have a flare-up. And it assesses the zone, and it gives you a personalized action plan. So the way things are done in the physical world with asthma, and some of you who may have asthma may have seen this action plan. This has been really hard to get uptake. But when you're assessed with asthma, some respirologists or even family doctors might give you an action plan. And it's a step-by-step process in terms of what you should do if you ever have an exacerbation. And it depends on whether you're in the green zone, the yellow zone, the red zone. And I mean, the uptake of this is pretty poor. If you got this sheet of paper that had scribbles all over it, you might put it on your refrigerator, or you might just pitch it, but it's really kind of hard to use, and a lot of people don't like using it, and a lot of clinicians don't like using it. But what if you had it built into a digital tool? And Sheena Malwani and the team did something pretty daring, is that let's try this as a chatbot. So the asthma action plan has been built into this application, and it looks like you're texting someone, a respiratory educator, but you're not. It is a bot. And it's asking you a series of questions about your flare-up, your exacerbation. And then it's going to actually deliver an element of the action plan. So it's making the action plan active rather than passive. So this passive piece of paper is now active, and it's going to give you direction on what to do next. So this is what it will look like. So this is just being launched now. And this is the algorithm. And the algorithm is based on just best practice. On a piece of paper, trying to get someone to do it on a step-by-step basis, it becomes prohibitively difficult. But if you activate it, if you make it digital, we're hoping that this is going to be something that is far more effective than giving someone a slip of paper. So planned features are, using air quality, what are triggers for exacerbations, being able to track it over time. These are things that we're planning to do. Now, this also applies to the more serious condition of COPD. And so this is already available. We launched this in the fall. And again, it follows the same notion of using this chatbot. And you can see here the action plan by the that's now used for COPD is a little bit more complex than asthma, considerably more complex. But the same process in which you go through in terms of setting it up based on your medications and having it be able to capture your symptoms through this chatbot and then deliver recommendations through this action plan. And again, this is the algorithm of that CTS action plan for COPD that's been realized within something like Breathe. But you know, this decision support stuff that we've been doing hasn't gotten a lot of uptake in electronic health records, right? So there's not a lot of decision support that's built into electronic health records. We're thinking that there's an opportunity here to build in this decision support right within consumer apps right off the top. And so the team also has been very cognizant of how this is going to work within a typical clinic. And so this is the service design that they've planned out in terms of the relationship between the patient, the physician, the certified respiratory educator, and the application itself. So this has been done in a very deliberate fashion to make sure that the clinic and the patient and the app all work in concert. And including, you know, creating something like this that can be filled out very quickly, and the patient can take this home and work with it within the application rather than spending a lot of time in the clinic. And again, another important aspect is that all our applications will have this layer of an informed consent process up front so that we can conduct research, so that patients can donate their data for the purposes of research. So I want to end off with something of particular interest and I think is right at the bleeding edge, is sort of the ultimate digital wearable, is what people have been calling the artificial pancreas, and perhaps more modestly is the automated delivery of insulin, automated insulin delivery. So the way this is working, and this is just coming out now, is the use of a continuous blood glucose monitor, a controller, and the use of an insulin pump. So these products exist separately, but if you can create a system that the insulin delivery is entirely dependent on the blood sugar reading, and it can mimic the functionality of a pancreas and restore that lost ability for a person with type 1 diabetes to regulate their blood sugar. That's the goal of the artificial pancreas. And I mean, managing this on your own, the burden of type 1 diabetes is such that these are the things you need to think about, the 42 factors that affect blood sugar. Right? It's not just about food, it's about your biology, it's about the medications you're taking, the activity that you're having. So, you know, aerobic exercise will bring down blood sugar, anaerobic exercise tends to raise your blood sugar. All these things you need to think about, environmental aspects, and things related to your behavior and decision making. What if you had a system that is a closed loop control system that allows you to do this? This is the work from Ahmed Haider from McGill. And this is a dual hormone system. So this is both insulin and glucagon. So the insulin to lower blood sugar, glucagon to raise blood sugar. And you can see here, this would be not possible to do by an individual. This is an entirely automated way. You can see that the blood sugar there is elevated in red here at about 8, right? A little bit elevated, and you can see the system automatically adjusting insulin on the fly. These are literally hundreds of decisions that a person would have to make that the system is making on its own. And you can see that it starts dropping off, and there's quite a bit of latency that in the system. It's not a trivial control system. And you can see that it's noticing this precipitous drop in blood sugar, and it cuts off the insulin and boluses glucagon in order to raise the blood sugar. And you can see the system ratcheting up the insulin in order to blunt the effect of the glucagon. This is literally hundreds of decisions that a person would have to make normally that the system is making automatically. So there are dual hormone systems. This is Boston University. And it, you know, as a prototype, it's not pretty because it's 2 separate pumps. It's the CGM. It's 2 ports of insulin. So it's not beautiful, but it's a start. And there are a number of companies pursuing this goal of a closed-loop insulin delivery system These are all, lots of these are come out of academic centers in the US and in Israel and in the UK. And this is the integrated version that Boston University hopes to have by late 2020, late 2021. Medtronic has what is known as a hybrid closed loop system, like a sort of the very first initial version. That's what it looks like. That's already available on market. But I think what's the exciting thing, and some people find this very disturbing, is that there's a lot of patients out there who have lost their patients and are doing this on their own. They're taking their insulin pumps, they're hacking them, they're hacking their CGMs, they're creating their own control algorithms, and they're doing this on their own. And the regulators and the companies are concerned, but there's technically nothing they can do about it. So this movement that's happened online and in a lot of diabetes communities is We Are Not Waiting. It includes this, what initially was just Night Scout, which is hacking the Dexcom CGM just to display the CGM data on an Apple Watch or on a screen or to their parents or to a loved one so that they could see continuously their blood sugars. That wasn't possible a few years ago. So this is, again, using an Android phone and hacking a Dexcom CGM, how people were going off and doing this themselves and creating open source libraries for other people to do it on their own, right? Controversial, but fully legal. As long as someone is not doing it for you, and you're selling it for or packaging it up, there's nothing the FDA or the regulators or the manufacturers can do about it. Now, this went one step further with this open APS, is that they took it one step further to close the loop and not just hack the CGM, but also the insulin pump as well. So you can see the Raspberry Pi there with the, which acts as the controller, the CareLink that communicates with the insulin pump, the battery pack, et cetera, and people are doing closed loop insulin delivery systems on their own. Now, a more elegant solution is this iOS only version, which is called Loop. This application is called Loop. And they designed, again, an open source reference design of this thing called Riley Link, which is a transcoder. It basically takes proprietary signals from one device and converts it to Bluetooth so that the iPhone can listen to it, to get the chatter between the CGM and the pump. And I mean, there are thousands of people who are doing this every day. And they are getting incredible results, fantastic results. And it's also not only the clinical results, but the lowering of the burden on them as someone who has diabetes. So I want to leave that with you in terms of the incredible potential patients have and that we're not keeping up with them. We have great opportunities here at UHN and otherwise to really tap into this. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe, for your great talk and introducing some mobile therapeutics to our audience. Before we jump into the Slido questions, can we actually get the screen turned off? Do you want the questions up there? Okay. Is there any questions from the audience before we? Yes, Terry?
Great talk, Joe. Now, all of these technologies, again, would be skewed to a younger, sort of technophilic demographic, and a lot of the, can you hear me? No. And a lot of patients who would not be in that demographic, again, would continue to have what we would call conventional care. What is the denominator of patients that this benefits at this point in time, and how do you see that denominator, the ratio changing as time goes on?
So the one thing I did talk about is the level of time, effort, and rigor that the team spends on the design so that this doesn't skew younger, right? So the heart failure patients that the almost 300 heart failure patients that we have are well into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I know that there's a tendency to think that this is for younger, but we have to kind of reject that. We have to reject this notion that someone who's 80 years old with heart failure can't use this. And if they can't use it, they probably have a family caregiver that can. And if that family caregiver can't do it, then that's okay too, because hopefully we've released some capacity in the system that they can have a conventional face-to-face mode of operating within the system. But if you're able and you have access to this, I'm sort of, and I've heard this argument for a long time that old people can't do this, and I think we have to rethink that. It requires very thoughtful design right up front. And we're being very simplistic about how much we ask of them, that these interactions should take a few minutes. We're experimenting with other forms. Like we have a voice version of Medley now that is entirely done by Google Home. So you just talk to it rather than interacting with it, because we know that, there's some people who might not be comfortable with a phone application or a tablet application, and maybe there's a voice channel. But I'd like to think that we're up for the challenge in getting that older demographic as well.
I'll stand at the podium, if that's okay. Are there any other questions from the audience? No? Okay, so why don't we just jump? Oh, sorry, hi.
You mentioned early on about
you mentioned early on that there were FHIR interfaces that would be able to send or receive medical data to iPhone. Is UHN either providing or accepting data through FHIR from any of these systems?
We are. Yep. So Slavens and his team, in fact, I think that team in systems engineering, they were on top of this years ago. And I would say UHN are leaders in this area. So very robust, sophisticated, mature FHIR interfaces. And not only that, not just the act, but the people on the teams and the people on my team, I'm really pleased that UHN is not just, we're not just following along, but we've been leaders in this area of the use of FHIR. And, it's thrilling to see the companies like Cerner and Epic and Apple adopting these standards as well. And what I didn't mention is in the US, the ONC, the Office of the National Coordinator, is mandating it for meaningful use. And there are penalties if you don't start using FHIR. So they're tying interoperability through FHIR to payment, and that has not been the case. And so that's another huge bonus for the use of FHIR. That announcement a couple weeks ago.
Any other questions from the audience? We have about 3 more minutes or so, no? Okay, so David. You got 10 too? Well, we'll go with people here first, and then we'll jump into the Slido questions.
So my question is, Joe, we have a pharmacy for drugs. Where's the pharmacy for your digital drugs?
Oh man, we talk about this all the time, David.
I know, so
Like every time I walk by the TGH pharmacy, and actually, Tim, when I walk by the patient library, I'm thinking, this is where the digital pharmacy needs to go. There needs to be a physical component because we still live in the physical world, but then there is a totally virtual online version of this digital pharmacy. I think my UHN is going to be a platform for that. I'm actually pleased with the EHR vendors are starting to think about the extensibility of their platforms, that they can't do everything for everyone. And so they're slowly opening up their platforms to allow third-party applications, including this notion of a digital pharmacy and consumer applications, to be integrated right into the electronic health record. We've done a little bit, like right now, Medley patients can go down to our bricks and mortar Toronto General Pharmacy and pick up a weight scale and a blood pressure monitor right from there. They happen to be overcharging our patients, so that's something we have to work on. But yeah. But what's interesting is that sometimes their insurance covers those things, and if not, they still can, because Heather Ross is giving them a prescription, is that they can get that blood pressure monitor and that weight scale written off on their taxes. So, I mean, we have to think through these things, but I would love to talk to Tim about space within the library. And I would also like, and we constantly have these conversations with the pharmacists, the conversations about the pharmacy, and having it as a little bit, because there's great traffic in there. And part of this is that, there are hospitals who've had these, the OBAR in Louisiana, they've had this with great success in terms of getting people. And there's a lot of pent-up demand. There's a certain demographic that is just waiting for this to happen. I think I demonstrated it in the diabetes community, the lengths that they're willing to go.
Okay, let's just Slido. Okay, so first question. With the increasing innovations in the IT space, what are the possibilities and considerations for healthcare organizations to use that data to improve patient care and health?
IoT space.
I think it's IT space.
Yeah. Yeah, Internet of
Oh,
Things.
sorry. My bad. Yeah, so sorry. IoT. It is right.
Yeah. Actually, David and I talk about this a lot, is that I've been doing this study with one of my master's students on the differences between aviation, nuclear energy, and healthcare. And it's shocking how much we're learning about the differences between those industries. And I think, the Boeing 737 controversy, which, 300 passengers have died over the course of the last 5 months in 2 incidents, right? And it's been front page news for the last 2 weeks. I think most of you know that in North America, 300 patients have died today, because of adverse events. And it's largely, there's a lot of reasons to that. And it's largely, a lot of it is because we don't have enough data to be able to measure the quality of what we do. And certainly safety systems don't compare to those of the aviation industry. The notion of a black box, right? Control processes, fatigue management. There's all these things that are engineered into an aviation system and into a nuclear power plant. Now, can a hospital get there? Yeah. I think, the idea of being able to measure the operations of a hospital is not actually that far off. The movement of people, supplies, patients, and so on. And we would get better insights, not only in terms of providing better care, but I think the safety issue as well. You can criticize Boeing and what's going on, but you could see how quickly everything happened and the remediations. And I also want to point out that in aviation, in North America, there hasn't been a single death in over a decade in commercial aviation in North America in the last 10 years. We seem to be very upset about these 2 incidents. But I think this is actually where we need to go in order to improve safety, is this IoT route, and be able to have hospitals as engineered, measurable outcomes, and being able to track these things at a scale similar to what we see in aviation and nuclear energy.
Does anyone in the audience have a comment about that also? And what's
I think that once self-driving cars come into play, you'll see 40,000 people a year who die in auto accidents. You'll find that go down substantially.
Yeah.
And it's one of those.
Ironically,
Take it out of the human's hands.
no, I know that. But it's funny because in the media, if someone is killed by a self-driving car, which that happened in Arizona last year, that's front page news. But the hundreds of people who die every day in motor vehicle accidents, that's never reported, right?
I have another question, not on this topic, but similar to what you talked about. You've shown so nicely that the EMR screens that you showed are like disasters. And that article from last week says disaster, $36 billion put into disaster. And then you showed these nice apps that other humans use, the patients use themselves.
Yeah.
Why do we even have, healthcare interfaces? Why don't we just give the clinicians like really nicely designed apps? Like why buy an EMR and throw this screen full of stuff that they can't look at when
Yeah.
they just want apps to do what the other humans are
Yeah.
going to be doing.
It's a really good. You know what? I should have showed it. I should have showed it, David. But we're doing something with Sick Kids now. So the rheumatology department at Sick Kids, they have Epic. The module that they have to do, I shouldn't say module. There is no rheumatology section module for Epic. There isn't. So we're building a web-based interface that will allow them to do care and research across Canada with informed consent, all these things built into it. And we are going to use the App Orchard as an interface. So, I mean, right now they have to do a bit of double entry because the Epic is the standard of care and they have to document there. But, you know, for a while they'll have this uneasy thing about having to document in this system that was designed specifically for treating kids with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, right? You know, just customized to their needs, a beautiful experience, and they have to double document. But eventually, with the App Orchard, we're going to integrate directly into that. And it just so happens all the other major centers across Canada, including Calgary, are on Epic as well. And you're absolutely right. That's, I mean, the opportunity, especially in very highly specialized areas of medicine.
Does anyone have comment about that they'd like to make in the audience?
So we should build the EHR in-house.
I mean, UHN, being one of the top 10 hospitals in the world, we have a lot of very unique programs. We have highly specialized programs and patients that only come here. I mean, to a certain extent, yes. And especially on the research side, absolutely. There's no one who touches us on that research side. So to a certain extent, there's going to be stuff that is relegated to the day-to-day, but there's going to be a system that builds around that. Do you call that the electronic health record? Well, it's an extension of the electronic health record, but how far we take that, I guess it remains to be seen.
All right, so we're actually hitting the 4 o'clock mark, and before you guys all go and talk to Kevin Smith and petition to create your own EMR, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you for coming to our inaugural rounds, and thank you for the team to pulling this together. We had a successful second attempt, so
right,
we hope you can make it to the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you, Joe, for doing such a wonderful job.